They say the woods up near Mackenzie Pass are haunted. Locals blame everything from old logging accidents to curses left behind by forgotten tribes. Me? I know the truth. My name is Nathan Cole. I was a Navy SEAL for 15 years. Tours in Afghanistan, Black Ops in Africa, the works. I've seen things, done things, but nothing prepared me for what I found in Oregon. Or more accurately, what found me. I came out here to disappear. You don't get to walk away clean from the kinds of missions I was part of. After a final op went sideways in Venezuela. Bad intel, a burned contact, and 3 of my team zipped up in body bags. I knew I had to get out. The nightmares weren't the only thing following me. So I bought a little cabin off-grid, somewhere the government couldn't reach and no one asked questions. 10 miles from the nearest paved road, surrounded by ancient forest thick enough to swallow the sun. It was supposed to be peace. The first sign something was wrong came with a blood trail. I was out checking snare traps for rabbits just before dusk when I noticed it. A smear of crimson in the underbrush, too thick for rabbit, too low for elk. I followed it maybe 30 yards. That's when I found the deer, or what was left of it. Its body had been ripped open like a zipper, ribs peeled back, insides hollowed, eyes gone. No sign of a predator's prints, just drag marks, like something had pulled it upright and walked away with it. Back in the cabin, I loaded the 12 gauge with slugs and locked every door. It's not that I scare easy. I've tangoed with Al-Shabaab in the desert and cleared poppy fields in the dead of night. But this wasn't human, and it wasn't a bear. I knew predators. This thing didn't kill to eat. It killed to examine, like it was learning. I kept thinking about those peeled back ribs, like someone was trying to understand what made the deer tick. 3 nights later, I heard the screams. High-pitched, wet like someone trying to cough up glass. They echoed through the trees, too close for comfort. My dog Rook, black German Shepherd, retired K9, ran to the door, growling low, hackles raised. That sound didn't come from any animal we'd ever hunted. It was something else, something wrong. When I opened the door and looked out, I caught just a flash of yellow eyes reflected in my flashlight beam, way too high off the ground. And then, gone. That's when the dream started. At first, it was the same old combat nightmares. Wides, flashbangs, screaming orders. But they twisted. Soon I was in the woods in my dreams, naked and bleeding, chased by something with spines down its back and too many teeth. The last dream I had before I stopped sleeping showed me a cave. A mouth in the side of the mountain, and deep inside, something breathing, waiting. I should have left then, packed up and gotten the hell out. But I didn't. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the soldier in me. Never back down, always finish the mission. Or maybe something deeper. A feeling that this thing, whatever it was, didn't just stumble into my woods. It came looking for me. I spent the next day prepping like I was back in enemy territory. Every instinct screamed recon and defense. I set up motion-triggered trail cams around the perimeter, packed a bug-out bag with MRES ammo, and a satellite phone I'd sworn I'd never touch again. Rook stayed close, tail stiff, ears twitching with every breeze. I trusted that dog more than I trusted most people. He knew something wasn't right. That made 2 of us. At dusk, I took a position on the roof with my thermal scope. The wind was dead still, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, a shape moved just outside the range of my spotlight. Low to the ground, but fast. Too fast. I aimed the scope, trying to lock on, but it ducked behind a tree and vanished. Not a coyote. Not a bear. I'd seen something similar once in Kandahar. A man high on a cocktail of drugs, crawling on all 4s and growling like an animal. But this was different. Smarter. Then, silence shattered. One of the tripwires rigged with empty cans clanged from the eastern perimeter. I jumped down, boots crunching in the frost, shotgun ready. Rook took off ahead of me. I caught up to find the wire tripped, but nothing there. No prints. No sound. Just that thick, unnatural quiet pressing in around us like a vice. And then Rook growled, low. He was facing the tree line, teeth bared. I raised the shotgun. Show yourself, I yelled, voice steady. I expected silence. Instead, I got an answer. A wet, whispering sound, like flesh sliding against bark, moved between the trees. Then a voice, high-pitched, mocking. It parroted me. My skin went cold. It wasn't a human voice. It was trying to sound human and failing. Rook lunged toward the sound and I followed, breath steaming in the air. I didn't fire. Not yet. We pushed through brush, deeper into the dark until we came to the edge of a dry creek bed. That's where we saw it. Eyes. At least 6 of them, glowing faint yellow like bioluminescent fungus. They blinked one after the other in sequence, then all at once. Below the eyes, nothing made sense. Spines, slick skin like burned leather, a mouth that split open sideways when it hissed. Not a chupacabra like the legends say. This was something new, or maybe something ancient that the old stories never got right. I fired. Slugs ripped through branches, shattering the quiet. The thing darted backward on all fours, too fast for a clean hit. It screeched, not in pain, but frustration, and vanished into the night. Rook whined but didn't retreat. We stood there, surrounded by the noise of the forest returning like a breath exhaled. I knew then this wasn't over. I'd made contact. Now it knew I was a threat. And if I'd learned anything from years of combat, it was that threats don't run. They regroup. The trail cams picked up something just before dawn. I reviewed the footage frame by frame, heart pounding. One of them caught it crouched low by the creek. Those eyes glowing faintly, just visible through the blur of motion. The timestamp read 3:17 am. It stood still for almost 7 minutes. Watching the cabin, watching me. That kind of patience didn't come from hunger. It came from intelligence. From purpose. I called a buddy of mine. Marcino Mace Alvarez, another SEAL, now working private security out of Spokane. I gave him the need to know and asked for gear. Thermal drones, recon optics, and enough firepower to take down a tank. Jesus, Nate, he said over the line. You prepping for war or a bear hunt? I didn't answer. He knew better than to press. Give me 48 hours, he said, then hung up. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark with Rook curled at my feet, shotgun across my lap. I kept thinking about the way that thing moved, how it studied me, like it was learning. I started wondering if it had been in the cabin already. Maybe when I was out checking traps. What if it had been inside, touching my gear, watching me sleep? That's when I found the claw marks under the window frame. 4 deep grooves carved into the wood, fresh, like it had been tracing its way in. By the next morning, the air had changed. Still pine sweet, still cold, but heavier, more silent. The birds didn't sing. The squirrels were gone. Even the flies had vanished. Nature had gone on lockdown. It felt like something big was about to go down, and it did. I found the hiker around noon, maybe half a mile from the cabin. His name was Thomas Stager, according to the ID in his ripped wallet. Backpack torn, boots missing, shirt soaked through with blood, and something black and tarry I couldn't identify. His chest was caved in like something had crushed it, but his face, Jesus. His eyes had been scooped clean out, and his jaw dislocated, stretched wide in a frozen scream. Like he'd seen it. Really seen it. And whatever he saw had broken him from the inside out. I buried what was left under a cairn of stone and marked the coordinates for Mace. I wasn't about to call the authorities. Not yet. If I told them a chupacabra killed a hiker, I'd end up on a psych hold. But I knew what I saw, and I knew this wasn't random. Thomas had walked into its territory. Or worse, maybe it had lured him. That was when I realized this wasn't just a creature. It was a predator building a pattern, a hunting range. I stood there above the grave, shotgun slung over my shoulder, eyes scanning the woods. I spoke out loud, not sure why. Maybe to piss it off. Maybe because I wanted it to hear me. You picked the wrong man to hunt, I said. I've killed things tougher than you. Faster. Smarter. You're not a myth. You're just next. Mace arrived late the next evening, pulling up in an unmarked Tacoma with military-grade suspension and a bed full of pain. Night vision gear, scoped rifles, thermal drones, tripwire mines. Enough to give any predator pause. You weren't kidding, he said as he stepped out, taking in the perimeter with narrowed eyes. This place feels wrong. Rook sniffed at him, then growled low. He'd never done that before. Not to someone I trusted. I gave Mace the rundown as we prepped gear. The eyes, the mimicry, the kill. We weren't tracking a mindless animal. We were at war with something that killed for sport and studied its prey. Like a damn xenomorph, Mace muttered as he loaded an extended mag into his rifle. But out here, it's the only thing not playing pretend. I didn't laugh. The deeper we went into this, the more I felt like this forest wasn't just its home. It was its nest. We launched the drone at midnight. It took to the sky with a faint hum, vanishing into the treetops. The thermal camera swept wide. Forest was quiet. Too quiet. Until the signal glitched. For 2 seconds, static. Then an image. Heat signature, upright. Tall. Unmoving. Center screen. Then gone. You see that? I asked. Mace nodded, his jaw clenched. It knew we were watching. We moved toward the location on foot, weapons up, calm, silent. Rook led point, ears pinned. The air grew colder with every step. Not natural cold, but a pressure that clung to the skin. I spotted scratch marks again. On trees this time. Tall, too high for a bear. Space like hands. The closer we got, the more I noticed the bones. Dozens. Cracked open, marrow sucked dry. Sticks arranged in strange patterns. Circles, XS, spirals. Not random. Ritual. That's when we found the den. It wasn't a cave. Just a sinkhole, obscured by roots and brush. But the stench pouring out of it was enough to make Mace gag. Blood, rot, ammonia. Something had been nesting in there. I spotted claw marks leading down into the dark. We exchanged a glance. You going in? He asked. I nodded once, then dropped a flare. The light caught on something slick and moving just out of reach. A hiss, a rustle, then silence. Suddenly, the flare went out. We backed away, weapons raised, hearts pounding. Rook barked once. Sharp warning. And that's when it came. From the tree line behind us. It was bigger than before. Taller. Limbs too long, joints wrong. Skin pulled taut over muscle and bone, black as oil. Its head cocked sideways as it stared at us, unblinking. No fear, just hunger. It opened its mouth, and we heard it again. Our own voices. You picked the wrong man to hunt, it remembered. The moment I heard my own voice echo back to me from its throat, something broke loose inside me. Something cold and primal. My instincts screamed to run, but my training held. I raised my rifle and fired. The thing dodged the first shot with an unnatural twitch, then lunged. Mace opened up next to me, and the night lit with muzzle flashes and the roar of suppressed fire. But it was fast. Faster than anything on 2 legs should be. Rook charged, teeth bared, and for a second, I thought he had it. He bit deep into the creature's thigh, but it didn't howl, didn't bleed. It slammed him into a tree, spine first, with a sickening crack. I screamed his name, but he didn't move. That's when the rage hit. Blinding, red-hot rage. I kept firing, chasing the thing into the trees until I hit dry click. Mace grabbed my vest, pulled me back. It's leading you, he barked. It wants you separated. He was right. It didn't kill us when it had the chance. It wanted the fight. It wanted the hunt. It was testing us, seeing how far it could push. And Rook was the price of my hesitation. I knelt by him, felt the faintest breath. He was alive, but barely. I wrapped him in my jacket and handed him to Mace. Get him back to the cabin. Patch him up best you can. Then set every trip mine we've got. Tonight, we end this. Mace hesitated, but nodded. You sure? I'm not running anymore, I said. Neither is it. I tracked the bloodless trail it left. Bent grass, twisted branches, those inhuman claw marks. It wasn't retreating. It was circling back, planning. I kept low, silent, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Then I found its second den. Another sinkhole, but deeper, older, covered in bones, not just animal this time. Human skulls, at least four. One still had a ranger's hat half fused to the scalp. So many had come through here, just disappeared, written off as lost hikers. This thing had been hunting for years. Undetected, untouched, a ghost. But ghosts don't bleed. I planted charges around the edge of the sinkhole and set a trap. Heat signatures. Noise lures. If it had learned us, we could learn it too. It favored the high ground, came in from the north. Always hit hard and fast, then vanished. But tonight, I was the bait. I returned to the cabin just as Mace armed the final mine. Rook was breathing, hooked to fluids. His eyes opened and locked on mine. Still fighting. I whispered, "Good boy," then turned to face the woods. The wind had died. The air hung still. And then I heard it. Mimicking Mace this time. "Get ready." The first explosion shattered the silence. A tripwire mine deep in the trees, set off by something moving too fast for any deer. I was already at the window, rifle up, scanning the tree line through the thermal scope. Mace was outside, circling wide. We had a plan. But plans mean nothing when the thing you're hunting thinks 2 steps ahead. "Contact right," Mace shouted through comms. A blur on my scope. Hot, fast. The second mine went off. Flames flickered through the branches, but it just kept moving. I heard it slam against the side of the cabin, felt the frame shake. It wasn't running this time. It was coming in. I backed up as the door burst open. Splinters flying, hinges screaming. It stood there in the entryway, framed by moonlight and firelight, its chest rising and falling like it was laughing without sound. Its eyes locked with mine. And then it spoke. "I want the one who watched." I didn't wait. I pulled the trigger and emptied the mag into its chest. It staggered back, but only for a second. Then it was on me. The rifle flew from my hands. Claws grazed my ribs. Pain flashed white hot. We went through the wall together, crashing into the mud outside. Mace opened up from the flank, rounds sparking off bone and sinew. It shrieked, a sound like broken glass and static, and lunged at him. But that was the moment I needed. I grabbed the flare gun from my vest, aimed at its back, and fired. The flare exploded against its spine, lighting it up in red flame. It thrashed, screamed, and ran. I chased it. Deep into the woods, past the second den, past the bones, into a ravine choked with moss and shadow. It turned on me, wounded and wild, eyes glowing like twin embers. "End this," I whispered, and hit the detonator. The whole ravine erupted. Flames leapt into the sky. Dirt and bone rained down. The scream that came from beneath was inhuman. Final. The trees shook, then fell silent. I stood alone, heart hammering, smoke curling from my gloves. It was over. Or so I thought. Back at the cabin, Mace patched my side while Rook licked my face weakly. We sat on the porch until dawn, rifles across our laps, listening. But nothing came. No footsteps. No voices. Just wind and birdsong and the sound of the earth breathing again. We burned the bodies. Sealed the ravine. Reported it as a rogue bear attack. What else could we say? But I kept one thing. A chunk of its black, armor-like skin. It wasn't bone. Wasn't muscle. It was something else. I don't know how many are out there. I just know this one won't be hunting again. But if you're ever deep in the Oregon wilds, and you hear your own voice calling back to you from the trees, run. I've been in the Navy SEALs for nearly 15 years. I've seen my fair share of war zones, covert missions, and classified operations. We're trained to adapt, to expect the unexpected, to handle anything. But what happened in Bosnia? I'm not sure any of us were ever truly prepared for that. This was back in 1999, during the peacekeeping operations following the Bosnian War. Things were supposed to be stabilizing, but there were whispers. Quiet, off-the-record rumors. Of something strange happening in the mountains. Villagers were disappearing, entire towns abandoned overnight. The locals called it the darkness, but none of them would talk about it directly. Anytime we asked, they'd lower their eyes and cross themselves. Our unit was deployed under the radar, sent in to figure out what the hell was going on. On paper, it was a recon mission to investigate reports of rogue militias hiding in the mountains. But from the start, something felt wrong. Command was unusually tight-lipped, even for them. They told us nothing except for coordinates and the standard assess and report briefing. No backup, no extraction plan. It was me, Chief Petty Officer Stevens, and 3 other guys. Men I trusted with my life. We were a tight-knit group, and we'd been through a lot together. But none of us were ready for what we found out there. We dropped in at night, the Black Hawk touching down in the shadow of the mountains. The air was thick with fog, and the only sound was the wind whispering through the trees. It was eerily quiet. No birds, no animals, not even the distant hum of insects. Just silence. Stevens led us through the woods, moving cautiously toward the abandoned village our intel had flagged. The place was ancient, crumbling stone houses scattered along a narrow path that wound deeper into the valley. As we moved through the village, our flashlights sweeping the area, it became clear that no one had lived there for a long time. Yet, there were signs of recent disturbance. Footprints in the dirt, doors hanging open, and the smell of something foul, something rotting. Got a bad feeling about this, Stevens muttered as we moved forward, his voice low but tense. I could feel it too. An unnatural heaviness in the air, like the very land itself didn't want us there. We set up camp just outside the village, keeping a low profile, scanning the area. That night, something changed. It was subtle at first. A flicker in the corner of your vision, a shadow that moved just beyond the tree line. But it wasn't long before things escalated. It started with one of the guys, Corporal Diaz, swearing he heard whispers coming from the forest. At first, we thought it was just the wind playing tricks on him. But then, it got louder. Like someone or something was right there in the darkness, watching us. Stevens tried to radio for backup, but all we got was static. That was the first real sign that we were on our own. The next morning, we found tracks leading away from the village. Not human tracks, though. These were large, too large, clawed like something dragged itself through the dirt. I've hunted every kind of animal you can think of, but I've never seen tracks like these. Stevens ordered us to follow them, even though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. We moved deeper into the mountains, the terrain becoming more treacherous. The fog thickened, cutting our visibility down to almost nothing. The deeper we went, the stronger the feeling grew. That we weren't alone. Something was out there, watching us, tracking us. By nightfall, the fog was so dense we could barely see 5 feet in front of us. That's when we lost Stevens. 1 minute, he was there, leading the group, and the next, gone. No sound, no struggle, nothing. We called his name, scoured the area, but there was no trace. No tracks, just nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. We set up camp again that night, hoping Stevens had just gone ahead to scout the area. But in the back of our minds, we all knew something had taken him. Something not human. That night was the worst of my life. It started with the whispers again. This time, louder, coming from all around us. Voices speaking in a language none of us recognized. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, and the fog seemed to close in on us, suffocating thick. The sounds of footsteps crunched on the ground, but there was no one there. Suddenly, Diaz screamed. I turned just in time to see him pulled into the fog, yanked back by something we couldn't see. We fired blindly into the mist, shouting his name, but the only response was the echo of his screams fading into nothingness. We ran. We abandoned everything, our camp, our gear, and just ran, hoping to outrun whatever was hunting us. The forest felt endless, the trees towering over us like silent sentinels. The fog clung to us, following us no matter how fast or far we moved. That's when we saw it. Just a glimpse, a figure in the fog, tall and twisted, moving unnaturally fast. Its eyes, they were glowing. Not with light, but with something darker, something ancient and malevolent. It wasn't human. Hell, I'm not sure it was ever human. We never made it back to the village. We found a cave, deep in the mountains, and holed up there until daylight. By then, there were only two of us left. Me and Petty Officer Lynch. He was badly wounded, his arm slashed open by whatever had come after us. But somehow, we survived the night. At dawn, the fog lifted, and we made our way down the mountain, moving like ghosts ourselves, silent and hollowed by what we'd experienced. There was no extraction team waiting for us. No reinforcements. It was like command had known what we were walking into and had written us off before we even left. When we finally made it back to base, they debriefed us for hours. We told them everything. The tracks, the whispers, Stevens disappearing, the thing we saw in the fog. But they didn't believe us. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't want the truth getting out. Officially, Stevens and the others are listed as Kia. Lost in the line of duty. But I know the truth. Whatever took them, it wasn't human. It wasn't natural. And it's still out there in those mountains, waiting. I've seen a lot in my time as a SEAL. I've faced down death more times than I can count. But that mission in Bosnia, that was something else. Something older. Something evil. And I pray to God it never finds its way out of those mountains. I was about 26 years old when this event happened, about 9 years ago. A friend and I decided to go on a 2-week road trip from Kansas, Colorado, Utah, and all down the West Coast. We camped the whole way and had an incredible time, other than occasionally having trouble finding campsites. One day, after a fun, gluttonous night in Portland, we decided to camp on Mount Hood. It was the middle of the summer, so we expected to see other campers on the mountain, even though it was a weekday. We had to drive pretty far up in search of a campsite, because all of the ones towards the bottom were closed, due to fallen trees or trees that would be falling if a strong breeze came through. I don't know what that was about, but it was a beautiful mountain with natural spring water and clear rivers. We were excited to be there. We saw a couple of old men fishing on the way up and one family camping. They appeared to be Native American, and there were about 5 of them. I don't think these details matter, just describing in as good of detail as I can remember. We drive up quite a ways before finding a nice private camp spot and setting up camp for the night. We walk around, gathering wood, talking about the night in Portland, and setting up the tent. The time comes for us to go to bed and my friend falls asleep. I'm still lying there trying to fall asleep when I hear footsteps and leaves crunching. This puts me on high alert since there weren't many people camping and none close by us. I lay there with my heart racing and listen. I begin to hear voices and I try to nudge my friend awake, but she is out and not really waking. I continue to listen and I start to make out the voices and words. It's our voices having the exact conversation we were just having around the campfire, not even an hour before. I didn't last long before silence returned. Needless to say, I had a very hard time sleeping that night. I only ran once. My grandparents' house was never haunted till my grandmother died. They had the house built and my grandmother designed the place. After my grandfather died, my mom had inherited the home and moved in. There was a physical altercation between my sister's boyfriend and my mother. Police were involved and he ran. Fine, he was gone and not allowed to return. So the next day, to avoid another incident between mom and her boyfriend, I went to mom's and started taking my sister's stuff out of there. As I was moving things, there were noises upstairs. Typical of my nan after her death, and I thought nothing of them. As I am moving things from the second floor out to the vehicle, I'm going down the steps and all of a sudden I'm swooped upon by spirit. I had all the hair on my body rise and heard static in my left ear and whispering chatter through that static. I hauled ass outside. I calmed myself down, realizing it had to be my nan who accosted me. I went back inside and yelled at her never to do that again, and she'd scared me to death. I didn't hear from her ever again. I think she'd been disturbed by the incident that took place the day before in the home, and she was in my ear literally venting about it. It did scare me for sure. Weirdest paranormal experience I ever had. When I was a teen, we lived in a nice, safe, and trouble-free apartment complex in Istanbul, Turkey. It was 2005. I spent my childhood there and have some good memories. There is, however, one troubling moment that I can't get over. So one day I and my friends were playing football, having a blast just like any other kid at that age, until one of my friends stopped in his tracks and pointed at one of the apartment blocks with shock on his face. He asked if we could see it. What all four of us were facing was a man standing motionless at the edge of an apartment rooftop. Now this may not sound incredibly spooky to you, but it scared us to death as 16-year-old teens, and we didn't know what to do. We were looking at each other, completely baffled, until this man just jumped from the roof of an 8-story apartment building to his certain death. We bolted it out of there and went straight to our parents, all pale-faced and shaky, and this was probably the reason why they took us seriously instead of shrugging us off with kids being kids. Now here is the part which puzzles the crap out of me. Our parents checked the proximity for a dead body, but to no avail. Officers arrived sometime later for the same purpose because apparently people alerted the emergency line about a depressed man on a rooftop. So briefly this guy jumped to his death and vanished into thin air. We, as 16-year-old kids, witnessed him fall along with some other people who went as far as calling the police. Yet again, there was absolutely no trace of a man whatsoever. Have you had similar reports like this? Or will this keep haunting me forever? I do have a camping horror story that happened the last time I went to Shasta. My friend gave us a campsite he booked a year in advance, but couldn't camp it due to moving out of state. It's a coveted spot that's remote and near waterfalls and swimming. I went with a few friends and things from the get-go felt weird. The camp host was very creepy to the women and made a comment about seeing one of us changing in their car when nobody actually changed in their car. He then kept asking how many of us there was going to be and kept trying to get invited to hang out with us. We had the campsite for 2 nights, and the first night things seemed fine besides the creepy camp host. The next day, I heard him driving up to the site and saw his car and decided I didn't want to interact with him, so I went in the tent. The other woman who was with us was in her tent napping. I hear the camp host get out of his car and then proceed to ask the remaining campers' men how many women are left and where the one with the glasses went, who he lied about watching change. Finally, he left after we curbed his attempts at trying to eat dinner with us. I was already weirded out by him and felt my paranoia rising when I heard him ask how many women were left. Who asks that? Anyways, the night proceeds and it's about 11:30 and it's just me, another woman, and our boyfriends. We're sitting around the campfire when a car pulls up out of nowhere and parks near our site. Mind you, our site is about 30 minutes in the woods down dirt roads and desolate. Nobody is around us. We find a visitor at this time to be very odd and watch the car. A man gets out and walks up to just outside of our campsite and stands there in the dark, silent. His hands are behind his back and literally every hair on my body stood up on my body. Knowing to not come off as naive or a prey, I very firmly say, "Can we help you?" So he knows we see him and are not down with him being there. He then proceeds to stay in the dark and say, "You're not allowed to be here." In which we responded by saying, "Yes, we are. We have a permit." He then says, "I bet nobody knows you're out here," which then terrifies us, but knowing to stay calm, I say, "Yes, people do, and we have service out here." The man then says, "Have a good night," in a very patronizing and menacing tone, then gets in his car and drives off. I was scared he had a gun behind his back, and I was also scared he was sizing up our campsite to see if he could overtake us. But he saw 2 men and a mean-looking dog, so I think he decided against doing anything. After the man drove away, I couldn't help but think he might have just parked further off and could come back to our site at any point while we were sleeping. Plus, he might have been in cahoots with the camp host in regards to some potential kidnapping plot. It all felt super uncomfortable, so we all decided to pack up and leave in the middle of the night to try and find another site. We ended up sleeping off the side of the road, but it was worth not risking the chance of whatever that guy had in mind. Shasta itself is beautiful, and the nature does hold some sort of energy to it. The people are a whole other story, and I've never felt comfortable around a good handful of the locals. Good afternoon. I wanted to write in and report a sighting that happened to me and my two friends a few weeks ago along the lake shore of Chicago. We decided to report this after reading your blog about a similar sighting that happened the same night of ours. The events that I'm writing about happened on Friday, June 23rd of 2017 at approximately 10 p.m. I was with a group of friends at the Adler Planetarium just hanging out and having fun down by the concession area. We usually hang out at the lakeside because it's fun and you get to meet a lot of girls. This particular night we were hanging out at our usual table near the taco stand when we saw what had to be the biggest bat we have ever seen. This bat must have been at least 7 foot tall if he was standing up, but again, my perception might be skewed because it was dark and this thing was about 20 feet up in the air. All three of us were like, what the F is that? We all saw it about the same time as it flew over and continued toward the area of Soldier Field. It did this for maybe 20 yards or so, then abruptly changed directions and headed toward the lake and flew out over the lake and out of sight. This thing made no noise and was easily seen by myself and at least a few other people. We were so preoccupied with looking at this flying thing that none of us thought about grabbing our phones and taking pictures, which I regret because I could have posted this on YouTube or Snapchat and made $1 million. My best friend's parents live on this little dead-end dirt road outside a real small town. Their house sits on a few acres of land and is mostly woods. About a half a mile down the road lives this old man who grew ginseng for a living. When I was about 16 or so, this guy named Bobby Joe went missing. He was last seen on that road where his mom dropped him off, and no one had any idea where he went. My friend and I used to walk up in those woods all the time, and there was a rumor around town that Bobby was trying to steal that old man's ginseng plants, then ran off and was hiding in the woods. So what else does a stupid teenager decide to do other than go and investigate? There was a trail that we always walked on that was a good 20-minute hike from my friend's house, so we stayed on that same trail looking for any signs of someone camping out or something. All of a sudden, in the middle of the daylight, we heard a man yelling help from a distance. We just stopped and stared at each other and froze. We heard it over and over again and could still hear it from the distance, even as we were running back to his house as fast as we could. They found Bobby's body the next day, buried on that man's property. He had been shot twice, and his arm was ripped off from where his body has been moved. The old man only spent a little bit of time in jail because he hadn't told the police up front that he killed him. Definitely one of the biggest mind FS of my life. This didn't happen to me at the time, but I live in Queensland, Australia. Went camping with my cousins in the forestation covering the Glasshouse Mountains. We drove past those woods every day, and I'd wanted to camp in them forever. I'd build the experience up in my head. I was a first-time camper and didn't realize how damp the experience would be. It rained. The tent was shitty, but it was nice to spend time with my cousins nonetheless. 6 months later, they pulled Daniel Morcombe's body out of those woods. I was 10 or 11 at the time, and needless to say, that messed me up. Recently, I came across your YouTube channel, and after watching some videos, I felt like this could be a place where I could tell a story that happened to me back in 2016. I saw that you had a place where people are encouraged to talk about their experiences, and that is what led me here. In April of 2015, I moved to Junction City, Kansas after recently being married in March of that same year. I married quick and young to be with my partner at the time while he was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas. I was born and lived my life before this time on the East Coast, so moving to the middle of the country was a huge change in my life. I was a senior in college, and I left before graduating to go be with him. He told me that it was not a real relationship unless I was living with him. Even though I have family kind of spread out throughout the states, I did not have any family in Kansas or in the nearby states. The first few months of living in Kansas was a shock to my system. The person that I married changed drastically, and I felt like I did not know the person I just decided to move halfway across the country to be with. The relationship quickly became abusive, and as the months went by I was scared and felt that I was trapped. I could not reach out to talk to anyone about what was going on. I would be threatened, and with his stature of being in the military, and that no one would believe me. My family was also threatened during this time. If I reached out to them, either I would get hurt or they would. The only reason I mentioned this part of the story is to provide some background details that I think are important for the real story in this comment. I felt like I had nowhere to go, and on nights where I did not want to be home, I would get in my car and drive to a nearby lake. The lake was called Milford Lake, and it provided me comfort since I grew up near a town with that same name. When I did not feel safe, I would go to this lake and would look at the stars. If I tried to go to a hotel or motel, my cards would be traced, and he would go there looking for me. I first was introduced to this lake when we were required to go to this mandatory fun outing for his workplace. Since then, I'd always go to the same spot. Depending on how you were getting to the lake, there were two ways to get to this spot. The way I would typically go would take me on a drive over a dam that was high up. On one side there was the lake, and on the other was land and a couple more spots of water. It was a long straight ride, and I would turn left to go down this slightly slanted rocky road that led down to this area that led into a circle. There was covered picnic seating on the right when driving by, and there was a little playground on the left in the circle of the small rock path, and parking was usually more forward. There was a bench that I would always sit at. This was a great spot to look over the water. To the left, you could see the dam with the road that was used to get there. Looking more left, you could see some small wooden areas that were far off and were at the base of the dam. Looking to the right was water and lots of trees. This area was not lit at night, and to be fair, I was not supposed to be there after a certain time. I was told only once by a park ranger to leave, but other than that the area was pretty isolated when the sun would go down. On one night in the year 2016, I did not want to go home after work, and after picking up some food, went to the lake to watch the sunset. I did this often, and would take time to calm down and enjoyed being by myself in the quiet. There was a couple other people nearby in their cars, but left once the sun went down. At this point, I went for a drive to kill some time until it got darker. I never have seen the stars so clearly as I did in Kansas. I really loved this about the area. Around almost midnight, I drove back to the lake and drove down the small rocky path, past the picnic area on the right, past some parking spaces, and parked about 5 feet to the left of the bench that I would sit at. In my car, I had a blanket that I would use to put down on the ground to lay down to look at the sky. So I grabbed that and walked to an area that was about 10 feet away from my car to the right and laid down the blanket on the cement ground. I did not like to go into the grassy area in the middle of the circle, cause the ground would dip in places, and I did not want bugs crawling on me. Every 10 minuets or so, I would sit up and would look around, checking to see if there were any cars or animals. Even if I didn't hear anything, I would just scan the area and would go back to sitting or laying down to check out the sky. About 40 minuets into stargazing, I had an uneasy feeling and sat up. Once again I scanned and didn't see or hear anything, so I started to look at the sky again. Only a few seconds after looking at the sky, I felt that feeling again, but it was stronger. I stood up and looked around the area this time. To my left, far away near the base of the dam with the road on it, I noticed some movement. At this point, I was not scared, but became cautious of that. I've encountered deer in this area before, and believed that this was probably one of those instances. The wooded area was also far away, and because of the distance, I did not feel like it was a threat. Even if it was a coyote or something similar. I told myself that I would look back over once the song that was playing on my phone was done, and would adjust from there and sat back down. Before the song could finish, I felt something that I haven't felt before. My stomach dropped, and I felt fear. True fear, and as soon as I went to grab my phone, I heard clear as day, "Move." I jumped to my feet and immediately looked to the base of the dam near the wooded area to my left. The figure that I noticed was closer than it was before, and at this moment I knew that it was coming for me, that it appeared to be on a beeline to where I was. The amount of distance that this figure covered in the short amount of time startled me, and I quickly grabbed the blanket and bundled it up with my right hand inside of it, and started unhooking my keys from my belt buckle to hold in my left. I started power walking to my car. For some reason, I did not run. I did not want to run and let whatever it was coming out of the woods to see that I noticed it. While trying to present as much as a calm demeanor as I could, I focused on my car and did not want to look at what was in the distance. That is when I heard the sounds of rocks being stepped on that were not my own. Once again, the area that I last noticed the figure was in a grassy area, and it was about halfway from the base of the dam and my car. The fact that I heard something on the gravel meant that it traveled over 75% of the distance from the dam, and was now almost equal distance from where I was to the car. My car was in the middle, and we were both walking right towards each other. I looked up to gauge where the animal was, and what I saw was not an animal. I do not remember seeing any fine details of the figure. It was completely white, and in my memory, it was tall and walked very rigidly. I cannot recall any face structure or even clothes. I do not know how to convey the feeling of dread and terror that I felt in that moment. Even as I type this, my heart hasn't slowed and I had to take a few breaks and come back. I quickly looked at my car and started to almost run to my car's door. While I was approaching my car's door, I could see the figure in the corner of my eye and noticed that it was still moving the same way as it was doing before. It did not make any sounds, it did not break into a run, it did not lunge at me. I threw the items I was holding into the back once I opened the door and turned on my car. As soon as my headlights turned on, the figure was within 10 feet of my car and was in front of it. I threw my car into reverse, and while backing up, I saw that the figure now broke into what appeared to be a run toward me. I pressed on the gas and took a left to go back up the rocky path that I used to get down, and while I was driving up the path, I looked in the rearview mirror and could see that this figure was now running after my car. I still do not recall anything that the figure was wearing. As soon as I got up the rock path and was on the road, I drove as fast as I could to get away from that area, and when I looked back, I did not see the figure. That night, I did not go home. I didn't know what to do and had a massive breakdown while shaking in my car and crying. I drove straight to a Walmart that was over 2 hours away and stayed in the parking lot until morning. I thought that I was having a moment of psychosis from all the stress that I was going through in this time in my life. I have played this over in my head countless times and still am not sure what happened that night. I never felt that feeling of terror again, and now I never go anywhere alone late at night. For years I have had nightmares of that white figure following me from the woods. I genuinely could not explain it and thought that I was crazy. It didn't feel normal, and I never spoke about it until a few years ago to my partner. He told me to look up killer clowns in 2016 and said that the area that I was in at the time had sightings. I don't remember what the figure I saw was, and even if it was a person. That means that they were standing at the base of a dam late into the night and waited by themselves for a person to be alone. I also couldn't make sense of the distance that was covered in that short amount of time. It was very difficult for me to write this story. This was the most terrifying moment of my life, and I can't make sense of it. I no longer live in Kansas and am no longer married. That being said, I still do not feel safe when alone in nature. Thank you for providing a space where people can tell their stories. This incident takes place in the 1970s when my grandmother was a teenager. She decides to spend the night with her cousin on the Res Navajo Nation, New Mexico. They spend most of the evening swapping stories trying to spook one another, when her cousin gets the great idea to bring out the Ouija board. They start by asking typical questions like, "Is anyone here? When did you die?" etc. They played for a few minutes without any action and put it away for a while. They pull it out around midnight and try again when they finally get a response. I don't know the specifics of what they initially asked, but it led to them asking, "Are you here?" The planchette moves to yes and slowly drags toward the picture in the bottom right, the face of a man behind the woman using the board. They are all convinced that one of them is moving it to scare the others, And of course, they swear they are not. So they decide to ask, "Where are you?" The planchette spells out chimney. They grab their flashlights and head towards the fireplace and shine the light. About 5 or 6 feet up the chimney, they find a Kachana doll hanging there. There was no explanation for it being there, and no one could have placed it there as they had built a fire earlier in the evening. The ashes were still warm. They decided best to stop playing. My grandmother hasn't touched an Ouija board since. We all know the story of the Oklahoma City bombing of the Alfred P. Mara Federal Building that took place on April 19, 1995. I worked for a law enforcement agency in the area and spent many hours in the rescue and recovery efforts. Almost a year later, we had friends from New Mexico who wanted to see the memorial fence before the new memorial was built. My oldest son was almost 3 at the time, and as we were walking along the fence that had all the pictures' ribbons and things tied to it, we passed a teddy bear that started talking in a small child's voice. I thought it was a motion detector and tried to get it to go off again, but it never would. A bit farther down the sidewalk, my 3-year-old said, "Mommy, look at the baby." I thought he must be talking about a baby doll on the fence. However, there were no dolls on the fence in that area, but he kept insisting, "Mommy, there's a baby right there." Finally, I told him, "Honey, show Mommy where the baby is." He walked over to the fence, put his little hand through the fence and said, "Mommy, that baby girl is right over there." They always say kids can see and feel things that we can't. I believe he was seeing one of the babies that died that day. For years he would tell me how many guardian angels we all have, and can even tell me who they are, some of whom died when he was a tiny baby. This was one of several with him. As he got older, he lost his ability to see them, but by his dreams, he could tell me who was about to die or had just died. He is 31 now and says he hasn't had any experiences or dreams since he returned from Afghanistan. This incident occurred during the summer of 1983 as I was about to begin my senior year in high school. My family lived in rural Pennsylvania in northern Indiana County. Our farmhouse was built in the mid-1800s. In the early 1900s, an addition was added to the back that more than doubled the size of the original house. The original house was a 4-square house, so called for the 4 square rooms, 2 on the first floor and 2 on the second floor, with a staircase in the back. The house as a whole was sturdy, albeit a bit cranky. Every night in summer I fell asleep listening to the pops, cracks, creaking, and groans as the house cooled off in the night air. The house was built on high ground, next to the mouth of an ancient ravine that ran for over a mile, deeper and darker and rockier as it went down to the north branch of the Little Mahoning Creek. The ravine was heavily wooded at the beginning, then the trees sparse into a few old ones tenaciously rooted into the eroded rocks and glacial till. It was dark and cool and damp down in there, even on the hottest summer day, and I spent many summer days down in those woods. I knew the plants, the trees, the birds, and the deer. I heard much I couldn't see, like the rabbits running through the brush and the squirrels high up scolding me as I walked. I could sense the ones that hid and made no noise, the bobcats lurking and the nocturnal critters and peeking at my back after I passed their burrows. Sometimes sudden waves of total silence would descend on the woods. The air would be still. The birds would silence themselves. I taught myself to stop at these moments and to observe. I knew it wasn't me that made the animals go silent, so I figured something, a bobcat perhaps, was close by. I never saw what it was that caused the silences, but I loved to imagine myself as a skilled tracker. Nothing of the sort, of course, but I will claim to know those woods. I also had a bosom friend and companion as the roamed the woods and ravines around my home. A big male German shepherd named Chap. Chap loved to run and roam and chase groundhogs. We prowled along through the woods for years. This particular night I awoke suddenly, very awake and alert. The wind was blowing against the open window. Our room had the crank-out windows that were popular in the 70s when the hose had been remodeled. The bottom of the window tilted out and the rain ran off. There was a low rumble off in the distance, the thunder of a summer storm blowing in from the west. I was laying on my belly, my face on its left side on my pillow, and my arms around and under my pillow. I listened to the rain. It was not unusual for me to wake up in the middle of the night. It's been a regular occurrence in my life since I was very young. By that point, at 17 years old, I was used to my 3 a.m. ritual, though still very irritated by it. Across the room, I could hear my brother breathing. I could hear our dog, lying on the foot on my brother's bed, sniffing at the rainy night air blowing in the window. Across the hall from our room, I could hear my dad's low, steady, rumbling snore. Then I heard something that made my eyes fly open in the pitch-black room. From down in the ravine, off in the distance, I heard an animal call unlike any I had ever heard. It was a roar, an angry roar. To the best of my knowledge, the apex predator in those woods was the bobcat. This was too deep, too throaty for a bobcat. Then I heard it again. Surprisingly closer. A lot closer. I listened for my brother's breathing. Silence. He was awake. "What is that?" I loudly whispered. "I don't know," he whispered back. There was obvious concern in his voice. Then we heard it again. It had to be no more than 75 feet from the house, down at the corner of the ear where the trail led into the woods and down to the ravine. First of all, it was no bobcat. It was not a dog, not a coyote, and it was most definitely not a man. Next to my bed was a softball bat. Still have it, as a matter of fact. That night, all I wanted in the world was to slide my hand out from under my pillowed head and reach down and grab that ball bat. But I couldn't move. Everyone in the house seemed paralyzed. I kept expecting to hear my dad throw his bedroom door open, but he never made a sound. Then two things happened in rapid succession. There was a tremendous crash, like something or someone had ran headlong into the house. Then there was another roaring, screaming howl, this time right next to the house. It was an angry, roaring shout so loud I felt like it was next to my face. I had never, in all my life, heard an animal make a noise that loud. It was like a V8 engine with straight pipes was running wide open throttle. At the same time, there was a throbbing, a low-frequency growl that seemed to make the house vibrate. All I could do was close my eyes and try to scream, but nothing came out. I must have passed out. The next thing I know, it was morning. The sun was shining. The house was still there. I slept in, which was very unusual in my family. I went downstairs. My dad and brother had already left for the day. My mom stood at the sink washing dishes. I looked at my mom wide-eyed. Surely she heard what happened. She met my eyes and pointed to the back porch of our house, a small side room that housed the washing machine, dryer, and coat closet. I walked to the back porch to see that the door that led to the outside had been ripped from its hinges and lay flat on the floor of the porch. In the coat closet, with his nose pressed as far back as it could go, laying in a puddle of his own urine, was Chap. He lay there, whimpering, for 2 days before he finally came out. I was given the task to fix the door. When it was up and repaired, I went to my mom and basically asked, "Are we going to pretend that nothing happened last night?" My mom sighed with obvious exasperation and said something along the lines of, "Well, what would you like to know? You know what that was. Your dad knows. I know, we all know. Not much to talk about, other than how scary it was, and frankly, I don't need to talk about that, thank you." And for my family, that was pretty much the end of it. I brought it up once not long ago. My dad shrugged. I know as much now as I did that night. Me? I drive by there on occasion when I'm in the area. I stop on the old country road and listen a while. I listen to the wind and the birds. I listen a while, and then I drive on. I had been stationed as a park ranger in the Northwoods National Park for nearly 5 years. This was my first solo season in charge of such a vast stretch of wilderness, and while others would have found the isolation daunting, I relished it. The woods were my domain, my solace. There was something deeply satisfying about knowing the land, the animals, and the rhythms of the forest as intimately as I did. It was a life of simplicity, free from the distractions of city living. The first week had passed uneventfully. with the usual tasks of checking trails, inspecting campsites, and ensuring the park was undisturbed. The weather had been calm, with nothing out of the ordinary to suggest anything was amiss. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice small things. At night, when I sat in the modest ranger station cabin, I would hear the faintest of whispers. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, the creaking of the cabin, or perhaps even my imagination running wild in the silence. The whispers became more frequent, though. Subtle, but insistent. I tried to reassure myself. It was likely the wind catching on the trees in just the right way. But it didn't feel like wind. There was something deliberate about it. A cadence. A pattern. As if someone or something was trying to get my attention. Then, one afternoon, I noticed something strange on the trees near the trailhead. A series of marks carved into the bark. At first glance, they looked like natural damage, but the pattern was too intentional to be a coincidence. I leaned in closer, inspecting the jagged lines. It wasn't an animal's doing. No claw marks or nicks from falling branches. Someone had made these. A chill crept up my spine, but I dismissed it again. It was probably just some kids playing tricks. That night, I set out to investigate the trails deeper into the park. The static on my radio had started too. Intermittent bursts of white noise followed by what sounded like garbled voices. The park was vast, and the station's signal didn't always carry well, but this was different. There was a pattern in the static. It was unnerving, but I convinced myself it was nothing more than faulty equipment. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't until the fourth night that it happened. The voice. A faint call, barely audible at first, but clear as day when it repeated my name. Ranger Hall. I stood up from my chair, staring into the darkened woods outside the cabin's window. There was no one there. My heart started to pound. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, scanning the area. That's when I saw it. Across the field, just beyond the tree line, a figure stood in the shadows. It was too far to make out clearly, but I could feel the weight of its presence. I called out, but there was no response. My pulse quickened. I was alone out here. There was no one to help me if things went wrong. I knew then that this wasn't just a coincidence. The voice came again the next night. This time, it wasn't just a whisper carried on the wind. It was closer, clearer. Ranger Hall. The name, my name, sliced through the silence of the forest like a blade. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Whoever, or whatever, was out there, it wasn't natural. I grabbed my gear, determined to find out who was behind these unsettling occurrences. The cold air bit at my skin as I moved swiftly through the trees. The forest felt different now, heavier, as if something was lurking just beyond my sight, waiting. The static on my radio crackled again, distant but familiar. I held the device up, hoping to hear a voice, a clue. But all I got was more of that eerie white noise. The trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, watching, judging. As I pushed deeper into the woods, I found something that stopped me dead in my tracks. An abandoned campsite. It looked as though it had been left in a hurry. A blood-stained tarp lay spread across the ground, and nearby, scattered belongings. An overturned cooler, a broken flashlight, a torn jacket, were strewn haphazardly. My heart rate quickened, and my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a simple abandoned site. Something had gone terribly wrong here. I stepped closer to inspect the scene, my boots crunching on the dry leaves beneath me. The blood stain on the tarp was fresh, dark, and coagulated, and there was no sign of the person who had left it behind. My mind raced. Had someone been attacked here? Was there a serial killer hiding in the park? The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I scanned the area, hoping to see any sign of movement. But all I saw were the same trees and shadows. It was then that I noticed something even more disturbing. A camera, partially hidden in the branches of a nearby tree. My eyes narrowed as I studied the device. It was one of those small, discreet models, perfect for surveillance. My gut twisted. Someone had been watching this campsite. Someone had been watching me. The whispers, the voice calling my name, the strange markings on the trees. It all made sense now. But who was behind this? I backed away slowly, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of my radio. I turned it on, but again, all I heard was static. No communication, no reassurance, just the oppressive silence of the forest pressing in around me. A low voice came through the air, distorted, crackling with static. "Ranger Hall, you're not alone." My stomach dropped. This was no longer just a mystery. It was a threat. The voice spoke again, clearer this time. "You're not alone." My breath caught in my chest. Whoever was watching me wasn't just some prankster. This was deliberate. The voice, distorted though it was, had a familiarity to it that I couldn't quite place. It was as if I had heard it before, though I couldn't recall when or where. I couldn't stand there, rooted in fear, letting this person, this killer I now suspected, take control of the situation. My hand tightened around the flashlight as I scanned the campsite, searching for any clues that could point to the identity of the person behind the surveillance. There was no sign of life. The camera, positioned so carefully in the tree, was the only tangible evidence. I needed answers. I turned on my heel and retraced my steps back through the woods, heading for the ranger station. The whispers, that damned voice, continued to taunt me in the distance, growing fainter with each step I took. But it was still there, lurking, watching. I could feel it. The weight of it. The urge to confront whatever lay ahead gnawed at me. My mind raced as I made my way back to the cabin. The park was vast. Over 250 square miles of dense forest. I had been isolated here for weeks. Could someone have been living out here all this time? Someone with the resources and the patience to watch me. The thought sent a chill through me, despite the heat of my breath in the cool night air. Back at the cabin, I locked the door behind me and sat down at the small desk, pulling out the park maps. I traced my finger along the paths, noting the closest points to the abandoned campsite. It didn't make sense. The area was remote, well off the beaten path, and there were no known campsites in that particular region. Whoever had set up the camp must have been familiar with the land. That meant they knew what they were doing. They knew how to remain unseen. As I reviewed the maps, a thought hit me. Could there be more cameras? More hidden eyes watching my every move? I had to find them. I had to confront whoever was behind this before they made their next move. The ranger station's radio crackled again, the static filling the otherwise silent room. My fingers hesitated over the receiver as the voice, now a chilling hiss, cut through the noise. "You can't hide from me, Ranger Hall." A surge of adrenaline pushed me to act. I grabbed my gear, prepared to track down the person who had been orchestrating this twisted game. My only hope was that I could find them before they found me. I knew the forest well, but tonight it felt different. Each tree, every rustling leaf, seemed to be conspiring against me. The whispers had grown into a near-constant murmur, filling the gaps in my thoughts with their eerie cadence. I was no longer just a park ranger. I was a hunted man, and the woods had become a labyrinth with no way out. The decision to follow the trail of cameras, to track down the voice that had haunted me, was both reckless and necessary. My mind was running in circles, piecing together fragments of information that didn't quite fit. Whoever was out there was smarter than I had initially given them credit for. They knew the terrain, knew how to move through the trees undetected, and they had the patience to wait, watching me for who knows how long. I followed the rough trail from the abandoned campsite, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, any glint of metal that might suggest another hidden camera. I moved quickly but cautiously, knowing that I couldn't afford to make a mistake. The forest, for all its beauty, had become a hostile place. My radio crackled in my hand, but the voice wasn't there anymore. The silence was worse than any whisper. Suddenly I froze. A noise, something faint but deliberate, cut through the silence. A twig snapping underfoot. It wasn't the wind. Someone was out there. I quickly crouched down, my pulse hammering in my ears. The trail ahead was obscured by thick underbrush, but I could make out a figure just ahead of me, moving between the trees. My breath caught in my throat as I watched them. It was too dark to make out details, but their movements were unnaturally smooth, like a predator stalking its prey. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. This was it. Whoever was behind this game was about to meet their match. I carefully began to move forward, but before I could take another step, I heard the unmistakable sound of a branch snapping underfoot from behind me. Spinning around, I saw nothing but shadows, but I knew I wasn't alone. I had been lured into the perfect trap. Whoever was behind this had anticipated my every move. I sprinted forward, desperation taking over. I knew the park better than anyone, but in that moment, the forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, an impenetrable maze designed to trap me. There was no clear path, no safe haven. The only thing I could do was keep moving, keep running. As I pushed forward through the underbrush, the ground beneath me suddenly gave way, and I stumbled into a ravine. My heart leaped into my throat as I slid down the steep slope, the rocks scraping against my hands and legs. I managed to grab hold of a branch at the last second, halting my fall just before I hit the bottom. Looking up, I realized that I had just become part of the trap. The ravine was deep, the walls steep, and I could hear the soft rustle of movement above me. Whoever had set this up knew exactly where I would fall. I gripped the branch with both hands, my knuckles white, hard hammering in my chest. The ravine was dark, but I could hear the faintest hint of movement above me. Footsteps, soft but deliberate. They were closing in. My instincts screamed at me to climb out, but the terrain was treacherous, and with my hands slick from sweat, I knew I couldn't make it. Not like this. From above, a voice drifted down, cold and mocking. "Did you really think you could escape, Ranger Hall?" It was the same voice that had tormented me for days, distorted through static. The same voice that had lured me into the trap. My teeth clenched in anger. Whoever this was, they were playing games with me, and I was done being their pawn. I needed to think fast. My gaze darted around the ravine. The walls were steep, but there were loose rocks and branches scattered around, a perfect setup for a trap of my own. My mind raced as I quickly formulated a plan. I had the element of surprise. This person didn't know I had already turned the tables. They were overconfident, too comfortable with their manipulation. That would be their mistake. I began moving, slowly, carefully, making as little noise as possible as I gathered materials. I set up the rocks, stacking them along the side of the ravine, ready to trigger a small avalanche. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to create a distraction, enough to give me the edge. The footsteps above grew louder, and I heard the rustling of someone stepping closer to the edge of the ravine. It was now or never. With all the strength I could muster, I kicked the rocks loose, sending them tumbling down toward the person above. The noise was deafening, and I heard a sharp gasp from the other side. I didn't wait to see what happened. The moment the distraction was set in motion, I scrambled up the wall of the ravine. My hands scraped against the jagged rock as I pulled myself higher, one arm at a time, using every ounce of strength in my body. The sound of rocks tumbling echoed in the distance, but it wasn't enough to mask the thud of my own heartbeat. When I reached the top, I was face to face with my stalker. He stood there, wide-eyed, a walkie-talkie in his hand. His expression was a mixture of surprise and anger. I took in his disheveled appearance, unshaven, eyes wild, as if he hadn't seen sunlight in days. There was a crazed look in his eyes, and I knew I was dealing with a man unhinged. "Why?" I demanded, my voice hoarse from the exertion. "Why do this? Who are you?" The man laughed, but it wasn't a sound of triumph. It was hollow empty. "You're just part of the game, Ranger. I've been watching you for so long. You're strong, resourceful. I knew you'd come." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The realization set in slowly. This man was an ex-convict, someone who had been evading the law for years. His presence here, in the park in the woods, wasn't a coincidence. He had been living here, hiding in plain sight, a ghost in the forest. I didn't give him a chance to speak again. I moved fast, slamming the walkie-talkie out of his hand. He stumbled back, surprised by the sudden movement. But I wasn't done. With a swift motion, I shoved him toward the edge of the ravine. He lost his balance and tumbled into the lower part of the ravine, landing with a sickening thud. The sound of sirens reached my ears a moment later, and I realized the police were on their way. I had set the trap, and it had worked. The killer was caught. But something lingered in my mind. Something that gnawed at me as I stood over him, watching him groan in defeat. As the police arrived, I turned to leave, but the static on my radio flared up one last time. The voice, his voice, came through once more, distorted and broken. You think you've won? You're never safe. I froze. The chilling words hung in the air, echoing in my ears. The killer had been caught, but his twisted, distorted voice would haunt me forever. The police took over quickly, swarming the ravine and arresting the man who had been stalking me. His eyes, still wide with that unsettling madness, never left me as they handcuffed him and read him his rights. The officers seemed more than a little unnerved by the condition he was in. Dirty, disheveled, and delirious, as if he'd been living in the woods for far longer than anyone could have imagined. They began asking questions, taking notes, but my mind was elsewhere. That voice, that damned voice. I stood apart from the scene, my hands trembling as I clutched the straps of my gear. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the past few days was now a faint, distant buzz in my veins. The tension that had filled every corner of the park seemed to dissipate with the arrival of the officers, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm brewing in my chest. I had done it. I had caught the killer, but something felt wrong. As the authorities took the man away, I looked down at the walkie-talkie he had been carrying. It was a cheap, beaten-up model, nothing special, but I couldn't shake the thought that there was more to it than just a tool for communication. I moved toward it, picking it up cautiously, as if it might bite. I turned it over in my hands, wondering how it had been used to manipulate the voice that had tormented me. How had he made it sound so real, so close? The sound of the police radio crackling brought me back to reality. One of the officers waved me over. "Ranger Hall," he called. "We're taking him back to the station. You're free to head back to your cabin if you want to rest. It's over." I nodded, forcing a small smile, but as I turned to leave, the voice hit me again. But this time, it wasn't distant or distorted. It was closer. A whisper in my ear, soft and menacing. "You think it's over?" My blood ran cold. I turned, half expecting to see the killer standing behind me, grinning like a madman. But the forest was empty. The police were moving back to their vehicles, unaware of the ghostly presence that seemed to be creeping in around me. I tried to shake it off, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I moved quickly back to my cabin, feeling the weight of the trees pressing in around me. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as if the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something. I reached the door, fumbling with the keys. I had to get inside. I had to be alone to process what had happened, to escape the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. The moment I stepped inside, the door slammed behind me, and the radio crackled to life once more. The voice came through again, unmistakable, cold. "You're never safe, Ranger Hall. Never." I should have listened to my father. He used to tell me, people don't live off the grid because they want to escape society. They do it because they're running from something. At the time, I thought it was just another one of his old sayings, the kind you'd hear him mutter over a glass of whiskey. I thought I was smarter than that. I thought I was prepared. I was wrong. My name is Travis Barnes, and 3 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I moved off the grid, deep into the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, thinking it would be an escape. I wanted peace, solitude, and a break from the chaos of modern life. I found none of that. Instead, I found something that I still can't explain, and to this day, it haunts me. It all started after I quit my job in Knoxville. I was burned out, sick of the daily grind and the endless cycle of bills, traffic, and people. I inherited a small piece of land from my grandfather, about 60 acres nestled between the mountains, with a cabin he'd built back in the 70s. It was old, but sturdy, and it had everything I needed. Wood stove, a well, and plenty of trees for firewood. It was perfect. For the first few months, everything was fine. I spent my days chopping wood, fishing in the creek nearby, and reading by the fire at night. There was no cell service, no internet. Just me and the wilderness. It was the kind of quiet that gets under your skin after a while, but I was getting used to it. Then, things started to change. It was subtle at first. Little things I could easily brush off. One morning, I found my firewood stack knocked over, but I figured it was just a bear. Then I started hearing noises at night. Branches snapping, footsteps crunching in the leaves just outside my window. I'd grab my flashlight and rifle, but I'd never see anything. Just the dark, endless forest staring back at me. One night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was faint, almost like a whistle, but deeper, more rhythmic. It echoed through the trees, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I got up, peered out the window, but everything was still. Too still. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. I grabbed my backpack, a thermos of coffee, and my rifle, and headed down the trail that led deeper into the woods. I'd been walking for about an hour when I noticed something strange. A clearing I hadn't seen before. It was odd because I thought I knew these woods like the back of my hand, but there it was, just a few hundred yards off the main trail. In the middle of the clearing was a circle of stones like a makeshift fire pit, but there were no signs of a fire. Instead, the ground inside the circle was covered in small animal bones. Rabbits, squirrels, birds, even a deer skull. They were arranged in patterns, almost like someone had laid them out deliberately. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't a superstitious man, but something about that place felt wrong. I turned around and headed back to the cabin, trying to convince myself it was just some hunter messing around. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I heard the whistling again. Louder this time and closer. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard before, and I'd been hunting these woods for years. I grabbed my rifle and stepped outside, but the moment I did, the whistling stopped. The forest was dead silent, like it was holding its breath. I stood there for a few minutes listening, but when nothing happened, I went back inside. I was about to lock the door when I heard it again, faint and distant, coming from the direction of the clearing. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I grabbed a flashlight and started walking. I wanted to prove to myself that it was just my imagination, that there was nothing out there but trees and shadows. It didn't take long to find the clearing. The stones were still there, the bones arranged just like before. But this time, there was something else. A figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just out of the beam of my flashlight. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as I tried to make out what it was. At first, I thought it was a man, but then I realized it was too tall, too thin. Its limbs were long and spindly, like branches, and its skin was pale, almost translucent. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it, but then it started to move, slowly, deliberately, like it was gliding over the ground. I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep it steady. I wanted to shout, to tell it to stay back, but my throat felt like it was closing up. The thing stopped, tilted its head, and then it did something that I still can't explain. It smiled. Not a human smile, but a twisted, unnatural grin that stretched across its face, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. It was like the forest itself was mocking me, daring me to do something. I don't remember running back to the cabin, but somehow I made it. I locked the door, bolted the windows, and sat there with my back against the wall, clutching my rifle like a lifeline. The whistling started again, louder this time, like it was right outside the door. I could hear the footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. It went on for hours, or maybe just minutes. Time seemed to stretch, and I felt like I was losing my mind. When the sun finally rose, the noises stopped. I didn't sleep at all that night, and as soon as it was light, I packed up what I could carry and left. I didn't care about the rest of my stuff. I just wanted to get out of there, to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. I drove straight back to Knoxville, checked into a motel, and didn't leave for 3 days. I didn't talk to anyone, didn't tell anyone what happened, because I knew they'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. But I couldn't get that thing out of my head, the way it moved, the way it smiled, like it knew something I didn't. It's been 6 months now, and I haven't been back to the cabin. I sold the land to some developer who was looking to build a resort, and I don't care what they do with it. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whistling, faint and distant, like it's calling to me, reminding me that it's still out there. So if you're ever thinking about moving off the grid, looking for some peace and quiet in the mountains, just remember this. There are things in the wilderness that don't want to be found. Things that watch and wait and smile. And once you've seen them, you can never unsee them. I thought I was escaping the chaos of the modern world, but what I found was something much older and much darker. And if you're not careful, it'll find you too. Before the days of cell phones and pocket digital cameras, I was hunting with my 12-gauge in hills a few miles from where I grew up. Since I hadn't come across any pheasants in the frozen swamp areas that day, I decided to climb what we all in my town collectively called a mountain and started looking for recent tracks of game birds in the deep snow. After some time on the flat ground at the top, I came across a thick frozen layer of what seemed to be opaque, viscous, yellowish mucus. It was straight out of a horror film. There was so much of it. I couldn't help but follow the twisting frozen trail of it, which ended at the edge of a small, seasonal iced-over pond and a 4-foot frozen puddle of mucus with a completely bare, large, off-white canine skull with all its teeth seemingly placed on top. Honestly, I took the safety off my double-barreled shotgun, and the whole walk home I constantly checked if I was being tracked by something. That was one of the creepy things I have come across in the woods in my outdoor excursions. The city I grew up in, Allegan, Michigan, has had sightings of an almost white Bigfoot-like creature. These have gone back generations and between families that didn't know each other, and even those just moving to the area. Some new farmers on day one would see it before any real interactions with those who have been there for decades. My group of friends had 3 parents of different kids, all with their own sightings and would never talk about openly. Fast forward years, and during a game of hide and seek in an orchard, we all felt the ground gently shake as a massive white biped ran through mere feet from a few of us. We ran like hell to the house and started telling my buddy's parents. They shrugged it off, saying we were making it up to prank them, to the point his mother yelled at us to stop. Years later, when more news popped up about cryptids in general, we started hearing our parents' stories and the ones their parents had. Then, like a flood, our town was filled with people talking about it, and it was okay to in public. A lot of people won't because of the backlash they can get, and I know one family that temporarily lost their kids. The mom had been talking about it at work with a close friend a few towns away, and someone heard her. They called the state and ran a full report that she was mentally unstable and should be investigated. Just like that, the town closed its lips and it was hushed. I just heard about a month ago from my uncle, a farmer lost 2 of his calves. They were found over half a mile away, mostly eaten, with both in a tree 5 feet off the ground. Now the town's talking again. Almost feels like a repeat thing every 20 years roughly. And soon it'll hush down again. The photo that used to be in the party store outside of town where the hunters would hang their harvest pics of deer disappeared one day before I got there to see it. The owner said it was a clear as day photo of an almost sandy blonde ape on 2 legs taller than the 6-foot fence post it was behind. We have never talked much outside of my hometown about it. For the most part, we didn't want a flood of hunters and investigators coming in and clogging the town. This year should be interesting up there, and I am saddened I won't be able to make it for hunting, as seeing the old man of the woods, as my grandpa called him, would be great right about now. After moving, I always waited to hear that it's all right or the family of them are still around. When I was a teenager, I went to Bamfield, British Columbia with my best friend to meet her boyfriend. The previous summer, her dad had restored an old house out there, so she got close with a lot of the local kids and learned a ton about coastal life. I, on the other hand, grew up pretty landlocked and was always terrified of sharks and other things that go bump in the sea. She knew this. She invites me out with her when she decided to spend the next summer there as well, and she thinks it's a good idea to suggest we camp on the beach for the night with the other kids. All good sounds like a blast. I pack a bag and we leave the house to make our way to the beach. Instead, we arrive at the dock, and she tells me to get into this little dinky rowboat because the beach is across the inlet and we have to row there. Keep in mind, the sky is pitch black at this point. So I reluctantly agree to get in the boat, and we start our journey across the pitch black ocean. I'm having a nervous breakdown the entire time, but we make it to the beach and join the fire with the other kids. We then pitch a tent and have a great time. Everything was fine. The next morning, we wake up and pack our things. We decided to take a walk down the beach to see another spot before we row back, and just as we round the corner of this rock beside where we pitched the tents, I see this massive fish that I can identify at least 10 feet long with a Jaws-sized bite taken out of the side of it. It had washed up at some point in the middle of the night, because the other kids swore it wasn't there before sunset when they arrived. It took her a solid hour to coax me back into the boat to get back to the house. I was terrified. This one was actually kind of creepy because on the Saturday before Christmas, I had grandbaby duty because everyone else was off shopping and doing things. So I took my granddaughter to the mall in Cedar Park, Texas. They have a bunch of these bounce houses, these inflatable things, and they basically put them in shopping malls. Well, I had taken her to one of those and checked in and was just kind of sitting on the bench watching her. I noticed this kid looked like about a 6-year-old kid, dressed in black jeans and a hoodie, like a gray kind of hoodie, but not necessarily a clean one. And I'm thinking, this kid looks out of place compared to all these other kids. All the other kids are like running around not really noticing him, and so I'm kind of watching him, and he just happens to glance back at me, and I'm like, holy crap, that kid doesn't have any eyes. It was just black right where his eyes were. So I stand up and I walk towards him, and I think he must have noticed me, and he just kind of walked towards or past the inflatables. And there's a row of 6 inflatables, and when I say inflatables, it's the big blow-up slides or bounce houses. So I follow him, and I'm walking behind him, and the last little, space that they have are these stairs that you walk up, and it's a pit of foam blocks that you can jump into or do somersaults in some. And there's a front of a staircase, and it has a little turn to it, and I go up. I'm watching him, and he turns around, and he looks at me, and sure enough, a 6-year-old kid, black jeans, a white-gray hoodie, black eyes, or he didn't have any eyes. He waved at me, and he turned to walk up the stairs, and I kind of fast walked to see if I could get him, and he's not on the stairs, he's not anywhere. He just disappeared. And like I said, I followed him from the front because that's where all the benches are for the old people, and I noticed him, and I followed him all the way to the back. I was 15 or 20 feet behind him the entire time. He got to the back, made the little loop, turned around, and looked at me. Basically, he acknowledged me, gave me a wave, and vanished. Nobody at all. It was crazy. It was kind of weird though, because the entire time it was like he was there, but not quite in focus. Does that make sense? It was like he was standing there, but if another kid was standing beside him, he would be a little bit blurry compared to the other kid with well-defined angles and things like this. He was just kind of there. And the weirdest thing about it was that kids would just like walk around him, but not like acknowledge that he was even there. They were just running around going back and forth, just running around doing craziness with the parents and everybody else, and it was almost like I was the only one who even noticed him. And he was not necessarily happy that I noticed him because it was like he was scouting stuff out. I didn't say anything to anybody. I just grabbed my granddaughter and I said, "It's ice cream time, let's go." I was selling a motorcycle. The guy lived a few hours away and wanted to know a lot of information. So over the course of a couple of days, we emailed back and forth. He asked for pictures of this, pictures of that, details, etc. Then we spent another day negotiating a price via email. Finally, he made an acceptable offer, and I emailed that it was good. Then I never heard from him again. 2 days went by, and I emailed asking when he wanted to come get it. His reply was, "Oh, I don't have that much money." put a body kit up on Craigslist, and got contacted about a guy that lived about 2 hours away that wanted to come and buy it. I was working night shift at a bowling alley at the time. He called me about 6 p.m. on a Saturday night that he was almost in town to pick it up. I reminded him that we had not arranged a meeting place nor time. Also, I was at work for another 8 hours, and the kit was 30 minutes away at my parents'. He then began to blow up my phone, bitching that he and his friend took off of work and rented a van to come pick it up. Sorry, bud, not my fault. The closest I have was when I was selling a 97 Corvette on Craigslist in 2012. It was in good shape and mechanically sound. I knew what the car was worth and had it priced fairly at $15K. I start getting hits from a guy who lives about an hour away about the car, and eventually he wants to see it. So we meet halfway in a Walmart parking lot. He leaves me the keys to his Denali and takes it for a spin with his wife. Still manages to do a big burnout on his way out, which, whatever, that's what those cars are for. He comes back and asks if I would take $14K. I say sure. We plan to meet there again next week. I say I want a cashier's check, and he should bring his license so we can do a bill of sale, as I would be pulling the plates. Fast forward the next weekend, we meet up again. He says he wants another test drive before he pulls the trigger. I say go for it when he hands me the keys to his Denali, and off he goes again. 20 minutes later, her rolls back up and says, I don't know, something feels off, can't put his finger on it. I as what it is or could be. He says he just doesn't quite know. I ask him what he wants to do, and he offers me $12K. At that point, I laughed at him and throw him his keys and say, let me know if you change your mind, as I hop back in my car. Then he stops me and says, no, I do want it. What about 13? At this point, I realize he either brought all the money or he isn't going to buy it, so I say the 14 we agreed on or deal's off. He pulls out a cashier's check for $12K and then gives me the other $2,500 in cash, so he had planned such an attack. Oh well, turned out fine for me. It just bothers me people are always up for trying weasel you out of money. Sold an iPhone on about 3 years ago, and met the buyer in a grocery store parking lot. The dude looked precisely like one of the cousins from Breaking Bad, even down to the boots. He told me if there was anything wrong with the phone, there were ways of finding me. He then tried to give me $75, less than what we agreed to. When I corrected him, he stared me down for about 15 seconds, then handed the remaining money to me. After that show of bravery, I immediately changed my number, deleted that email, and haven't been on Craigslist since. This took place 20 years ago in Amman, Jordan. I don't remember the exact date, but it was June 1997 around midnight. I was 17 at the time, my sister was 14. She was trying to get to sleep in her bedroom, but it was a hot night, so she got up and opened the window. As she got back in her bed, something crawled through the window and stood at the foot of her bed. It was fairly dark in the room, with only dim light coming through the window. She saw a winged creature almost as tall as the ceiling, dark black with a crest on the top of its head like a pterodactyl. She couldn't make out any facial features or tell the texture of the body other than a slight sheen on the side. The light was hitting it. The most notable feature she noticed was its blazing red eyes, as she described them. When she locked eyes with the creature, a feeling of shock, dread, and fear took over her. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She couldn't move or look away. She felt the creature tell her to not make a sound in her mind, as if it knew she was trying to scream. This lasted for about 30 seconds as the creature stared at her silently and motionless. Suddenly, the creature turned towards the window and darted outside like a spear with a whoosh sound as it exited. We lived in a 5-story apartment with a 50-foot drop out the window. A few seconds passed, and she let out the most blood-curdling scream I have ever heard, which made me jump out of bed in my bedroom and dash towards her room. I flipped the light switch on as I burst through her bedroom door to see her sitting up in her bed white as a ghost, shaking and crying. My parents woke up and came running to her room as well. It took about 10 minutes for her to calm down enough to speak coherently. She told us that she had a nightmare. A couple of days later, she told me what actually happened. She seemed reluctant and scared to recall the details of the other night. I didn't know what to make of it, and we didn't speak of it again as I felt that would be best at the time. Fast forward 20 years, and I'm reading an article about the Chicago Phantom. The more eyewitness accounts I read about, the more I thought of that night. I decided to contact my sister and tell her about what I'd been reading. She seemed to get mad about me bringing this back up for her. She retold me what happened and is still terrified to this day. She is angry with me for bringing the memory back to light for her. But I convinced her that the story needs to get out there because of what everyone is seeing in Chicago. Hopefully, this account helps somehow and sheds more light on whatever this thing was, if indeed it is the same creature that's turning up in Chicago. I first learned about this cryptid in a summer camp I went to as a kid. One time, we went to a park in this rural town in Connecticut and spent the whole day learning about this strange creature that was first seen there. It's always stuck with me as this strange predator that lived in the same woods I grew up in, and it's very unknown, so I thought I would share its story. It starts similarly to many other stories with livestock and pets getting attacked out of nowhere. The later sightings of the creature, as rare as they were, described it as like a panther, only with its hair more like a bear's and even a small mane like a lion. These descriptions just sound like an average animal, almost like a large fish or cat. What made it so bizarre, though, was the sound it made. It was like a non-stop cackle of a hyena when it was moving, so it was assumed to be blind and used echolocation. With a sound as strange as that, though, any wildlife would quickly look around and run away, right? So how was it such a good hunter? It goes back to their eyes once again. If you look into them, you will immediately forget you saw the strange beast. Think about that for a moment. If you hear its strange cackle, you have no way of knowing how long it's been following you. You could have felt this exact panic for hours on end and repeat, but never know. Every piece of evidence that something may be wrong is erased in an instant until it's too late. It's a strange story, one most definitely not true, but at least the concept on its own has some terror. Hope y'all find it as fascinating as I do. I grew up in a town called Hawthorne, located in Nevada. Hawthorne is located right next to Walker Lake. The main highway leading from Hawthorne to Reno is Highway 95, which if you use Google Earth, you can see runs right between Walker Lake and a mountain range. This creates a small area of the highway that is affectionately known to locals as the Cliffs. When I was 14, my grandparents, Mom, and I were coming home late from a long day of doctor's appointments in Reno. My grandfather was driving, and we hit the cliffs a little after 11:30 p.m. I was in the passenger seat to help keep my grandfather awake, but I still think it was just so I would sing folk songs with him. Anyway, about 1/3 of the way around the cliffs, heading toward Hawthorne, there is a small area where the road pulls away from the mountain and creates a small alcove area. As we started to come up on it, we saw a large animal crossing the road, dragging another animal in its mouth, and it stopped in this alcove. Grandpa thought at first that I might get my first look at a live mountain lion, so he slowed down. When we got within 100 feet of it, he turned on the brights of the car. To our surprise, it was no mountain lion. We only had a couple of seconds to look at it after Grandpa turned on the brights, because right after the light hit whatever the hell that thing was, it turned to look at us 1 second, and the next, it leapt straight up the side of the mountain and out of sight, leaving the mangled body of a fox. Grandpa hit the gas and the old Buick we were in jumped, waking up the women in the back seat. I had never seen my grandfather truly scared before, but even he was physically shaking afterward. I remember the sheer bulk of the thing, and the fact that it looked like a really large bodybuilder. When it jumped in the same fashion as a human, with its arms reaching up toward the rocks almost over its head. It had long, thick fur, but you could see the muscle definition. I don't remember the facial features, But I remember the pure terror when that thing turned and looked at the car with shining yellow eyes. I even pissed myself. I have come practically face to face with a polar bear, and I wasn't as scared as when we saw this thing. Now I don't believe in werewolves, and I haven't seen anything like it since, but I hope I never do again. I'm currently on vacation in northern Maine, at some family's houses near Moosehead Lake. Earlier this morning, I was walking along the edge of the lake and saw a large animal. Surfaced briefly. Managed to take 3 photos I'm sending your way. It was a grayish blue, with no real identifiable traits. Skin looked smooth and had some lighter stripes. At least 2 of them, right next to each other. That surfacing was really short, and then they disappeared. I do not believe these are fish or seals, but I can't confidently rule anything out. Hopefully, you will be able to spread the word and maybe get something more conclusive. If you want more information, let me know. Apologies for the blurry photographs, going to attempt some better stuff tomorrow. Maybe I'll see something. I like to think Shenandoah National Park has a spirit of sorts of its own. I've camped with my old RV, cabined and lodged there dozens of times over the years and have had some atypical experiences. For one, my husband and I will never stay at a cabin in Lewis Mountain ever again for reasons too unbelievable to write out on Reddit. For 2, on another particular trip, I swear we were surrounded or followed by feral cats every night. Except there is no mention of feral cats in Shenandoah ever anywhere or by anyone. For 3, once I stupidly went hiking with one other friend a few miles north of Big Meadows. We started on the AT, but took several spontaneous trail spurs that branched off from the AT. We figured if we just followed the posts at where the trail splits, we couldn't get too lost as long as we kept a genial idea of what direction we were going. At the end of the day, sun was starting to set. We were sweaty and getting tired, and I looked down the side of the trail and could see through the thick of the forest a very large lodge built to look like a grand cabin with a sizable parking lot. I thought it was one of the lodging locations the park offers at first, and thought we were unlost for a moment. I figured if it was one of the lodges, we could use the bathroom, grab some food, and get back to where we needed to go by walking back on Skyline Drive, the only road in the park. So we deviate off the trail and cut across the woods and make a beeline for the lodge. Except when we got down, the place was completely deserted. It wasn't run down or anything and definitely looked like it was maintained up until some time ago. It was a weekend in the summertime, no reason to close a place like this. I remember all the lights were out and there were some beautiful stained glass windows. There were exactly 0 people around, no cars, no anything. If you've been to Shenandoah, you would know this is pretty unusual. Anyways, we decided to get back on the trail and eventually found our way out. However, for years now I have been looking for this place by car every time I've been back, and I never seen it again. I've visited all the available lodging locations and could never seem to find the place again. There isn't that many buildings within a few miles of Big Meadows, and I just don't see where I ended up that one time. Many years ago, when my now 28-year-old daughter was still an infant, me, her, and our dog were at the apartment we were living in at the time. My wife was at work, I was sitting on the couch watching TV, my daughter was asleep on a blanket pallet on the floor, and the dog, a German Shepherd or Wolf hybrid mix, was about 10 feet away laying in the doorway between our kitchen and the living room area. At any rate, I was watching whatever it was that I was watching when all of a sudden, Thor, our dog, starts with this low-level, guttural growling. I figure that he had heard someone in another apartment or walking by through the parking lot and don't think much of it. As a few seconds pass, I notice that it's getting louder and I can see out of the corner of my eye that he has lifted his head up off his paws, his ears are perked, and he's looking up at the ceiling over where my daughter was laying. I look up, don't see anything, tell him to knock it off. Right after I tell him to knock it off, he jumps up, starts circling my sleeping daughter, literally walking around the pallet she's laying on, and growling more and more intensely, even stopping once and outright snarling and snapping his teeth, all while staring up at the ceiling. After about 2 minutes of this, and me having no clue on what to do since I can't see anything, and I do not want to reach for my daughter with him circling her like that, he laid down next to my daughter, rested his head on her back, and stayed there for almost an hour, still intently staring up at the ceiling and occasionally growling. To this day, I have no idea what the hell was going on or what he saw or sensed, but it was extremely creepy to me. For several years, I worked as a government contractor, contracted by the Forest Service. I was stationed at the time out in Flagstaff, Arizona, so I spent a lot of my time hiking down in the Grand Canyon. One night, at about 4 in the morning, I was heading to the ranger station in the village of Supai, the only place you can stay overnight in the canyon. I was hiking about 7 miles down, where I would have to cut through territory. It was just beginning to get light out, but due to the elevation, it was quite chilly. That's when I noticed, at the top of the hill before you enter, something was moving in the bushes. At first, I thought it was a bobcat, and I approached it slowly to get a closer look. I noticed this animal had 2 large ears, a way too long tail, and was covered in some type of fur I could not identify. It had the body shape of a bobcat, but with a head of, I don't know. I couldn't tell what it was at first. Its face was turned away from me. All I could see was the side of its face, and that's when I noticed something very strange. It looked like a cross between the face of a bobcat and more of a lion or maybe a hyena. Its eyes were a bright green, and the body was covered in very thick fur that reminded me of thorns. Its front legs also looked different. Its front paws were not really paws, but more like hands. It was hunched over in a strange way, like it was digging for something. I froze there for a minute, trying to figure out what I was looking at, and it turned around to look at me. Did I see the elusive cactus cat that I'd heard so much about, a cryptid that is seen all around Arizona? My heart began beating out of my chest. For a minute, I thought about running away, but it only took one look into those eyes to realize this thing was not that aggressive at all. So I slowly approached it, moving my hand towards it. The thing looked at me with what I can only assume to be fear or curiosity. It did seem harmless enough. As I got within maybe 8 or 7 feet of it, it turned around and shot down right down the hill. This thing had quickly disappeared, bolting up and down the hill as if something much bigger had spooked it. I was still in total and complete awe of what I just saw. Maybe it was just spooked by a snake or something, so I continued on my way to the ranger station. About 20 minutes later, I got there, got in for my shift, and never mentioned it to anybody. I thought they would think I was crazy. In fact, this is the first time I'm even sitting down telling my story, just because it's so bizarre. It wasn't really scary, but it definitely caught me off guard more than anything else. I was not expecting this to happen. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in person. To anybody out there living in the southwestern portion of the United States, have you ever heard of this elusive cat? And if you do you know of anybody who's ever seen one? Before the sighting, I'd only ever heard of it briefly, which is why I'm still kind of shocked at the fact that I even saw it. Could this have been a crawler? I live outside of city limits in a border town near Mexico, and it was a bit more rural than it is now. Our neighbors owned cows on each side of our property. My sister and I shared a bedroom, and it had a window facing one of the cow fields. A pretty strong thunderstorm hit that night. Excited to watch the rain, I turned out the bedroom lights and lifted the blinds a little too quickly, causing them to fall from the window sidings. While my sister struggled to put the window blinds back on, lightning struck, and I noticed someone or something crawling like Spider-Man in the cow field in our direction. No cows were in the field. I freaked out and started screaming at my sister to hurry up and put the blinds back up, and this thing kept crawling on all fours. I wished it was a dog, but it didn't move like one. My sister managed to get the blinds back up, and we turned on our bedroom lights. I explained to my sister what I saw in the cow field. She was freaking out, but we were both too scared to walk across the living room where there was a huge bay window to wake our parents up. We tried distracting ourselves with other things, and then we started to hear a sound like a human, but with a growling wheeze right at our window. My bed was by the window. The blinds were closed at this point, but the wheezing was so loud it was as if that thing was in front of me. I covered myself with a blanket while my sister and I stared at each other in horror and whispered. We kept the lights on. The wheezing stopped, and out of fear, I ended up falling asleep before my sister did. She said the wheezing sound came back once I was asleep. After that night, we didn't hear anything like that. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, my uncle told me a story that has stuck with me ever since. Growing up in Kentucky, I've always heard tales of, Bigfoot or the Pope Lick Goat Man. The usual run-of-the-mill, urban legend, campfire story. But in the case of the story my uncle had told me, it was different than all the other tall tales I had heard before, or since. Kentucky is home to the world's largest cave system in the world, Mammoth Cave. Since its founding on July 1, 1941, only about 365 miles have been surveyed by the human eye. It's believed that there are still over 600 miles of passageways and caverns yet to be discovered. The national park is stretched over 3 counties, spanning more than 50,000 acres. Edmonson, Hart, and Barron counties. My uncle owned land in Edmonson County since the early 1980s. I remember hearing about how, when they were out hunting for deer, they would occasionally come across pits in the ground of various sizes. They were the mouths of cave entrances. They would usually just toss a barrel or a large tree branch into the hole, so no one would stumble across it, fall in, and become trapped. Besides wildlife or just getting lost in the woods, there wasn't really much else you had to worry about. According to most people, this story takes place in the early 1990s, about 5 years after my uncle purchased the land. His closest neighbor, who I'll call Ken, lived about a half a mile down the dirt road that ran parallel to both of their properties. They naturally became good friends over time and on occasion would accompany each other hunting. My uncle lived in Louisville and would visit his property when he had off days or needed to do upkeep, like mowing or restocking his pond. So unlike his neighbor Ken, he spent more than most of the year in Louisville. On this particular weekend, Ken went out hunting for deer. He left his cabin and headed off into the woods, as he had done 100 times before. He followed a path that he had used plenty of times to a small grouping of trees overlooking a large meadow. According to him, it was a perfect sunny fall day with not many clouds in the sky. He sat in the shadows underneath some low-hanging tree branches, feeling hidden from any would-be prey that might come by. Despite it being the ideal weather for hunting, he didn't see much in terms of game. Just a few fawn and a doe, not the big trophy buck he was hoping for. He had been entertaining the idea of just grabbing his gear and heading back to the cabin, but not wanting to go home empty-handed, he decided to stick around for a little while longer in hopes his luck would change. His chest fluttered when he looked across the meadow to the left and seeing movement in the tree line opposite of him. He pulled his rifle to his shoulder and looked down the scope. The thick trees and foliage at the edge of the tree line prevented him from getting a good view of the animal in his sights. From what he could tell, it was heading towards the edge of the woods. He just had to be patient. When it stepped out of the shadows of the trees about 50 yards away and into the clearing, he knew almost immediately he wasn't looking at a deer. He tried to keep his hands from shaking his rifle as he desperately tried to identify exactly what it was he was looking at. He described its body of that of a panther, but the upper torso where the shoulders and neck were, sat noticeably higher than its lower back and hind legs. He was looking at its side profile, which he claimed while in mid-stride. This thing had to be close to 7 feet in length. He said it was quiet, like a cat. It never made a noise when it moved. The front legs, he said, looked more like arms, significantly longer and skinnier than its hind legs. It had brittle dark brown hair that started from the back of its head and running down the length of its back. He also claimed that the creature's skin looked waxy, almost like a chimpanzee's skin, dark brown, almost black. Its face was long like a dog's, but he said he noticed no ears. He said the corners of its mouth ended by the neck, where the ears should be. The most unsettling detail I can remember of his account, though, was the thing's back legs. He described them as looking frog-like, as in the back legs were tucked up close to the creature's sides. When it walked, the leading leg would reach almost to the front half of its body, and the other leg would stretch way back, flat like a frog when it crawls. He watched it for about 2 or 3 minutes, slowly and quietly moving through the long golden grass. A black shadow surrounded by color. He watched it disappear into the tree line directly across from the woods he'd seen it come from initially. After a few moments, he left and headed back to his cabin. Now, I don't know how long it was after this incident occurred that Ken told my uncle about it, but he was reluctant to speak on it. He dubbed it the Kentucky Holler Crawler. Eventually, Ken explained the story in full one night while sat around a fire with my uncle. Ever since then, Ken refused to go into the woods. He claimed to only hunt from the dirt road running through his property afterward. Both my uncle and Ken have sadly passed away since, but their story never changed over the years. I even had my uncle retell the story to me a few years back, just so I knew I had all the details right. Maybe this was just another tall tale used to scare me and my brother when we were kids, camping on my uncle's land. But I know one thing for sure, he was an honest man, and his eyes told the truth when he would tell me that story. He had his fair share of unexplainable instances as well. I'm sure anybody would after frequenting a cabin in the middle of nowhere Kentucky for over 30 years. The thing that keeps me up at night, though, isn't the thought of the creature, it's the thought of where it came from. Who's to say this thing didn't crawl up from the caves, spanning hundreds of miles in every direction? Hidden from civilization, thriving off the ecosystem. Nothing is impossible when it comes to nature. Nobody really knows for sure what is out there in the dark. This took place ago in the Rockies in Colorado a few days ago. I just seek help trying to figure out if I'm crazy or bumped into something. I'd heard the stories, read plenty of them online, and seen the videos about them as well. I was never sure about them, never sure if they were real, probably because I didn't want them to be, because whether I'd admit it or not they were creepy, but I couldn't rule them out. I was camping, half an hour outside of a small town in Colorado at about 8,500 feet. Snow covered the dirt road I took to get to the campsite. I'd only set it up earlier that day. 10-15 minutes if my drive out of town was through the park, with campsites, essentially clearings with stone fire pits in them. I set up at the 4th or 5th one. I was the only camper there at the time. On one of my returns to camp, after visiting in town about 100 feet down the 1.5 mile into the park my trail, I saw a herd of deer off to the left side of the trail, probably 7-8 of them. They were only a few feet from the trail and all spooked, save for one deer. The deer was facing the same direction of the car before I came and was the closest to the pathway. While the other deer retreated 15-20 feet deeper into the woods, he turned to face my car. Already only going 5-10 miles per hour and on a rough part of the trail, I wasn't passing very quickly, so I slowed and stopped. He followed the whole way. For some reason I spoke to him. Unsure and slightly uneasy at this fearless deer. After all, I'm treading on his land. I was protected in the car, and he was an average-sized deer, so there was no reason to think it'd do anything to me. But somehow, someway, an animal demanded respect. I don't think I ever saw it blink, for what felt like forever, but was likely 5 minutes we stared at each other, the deer never moving anything about him. I thought to take a picture of him and his herd watching from behind him down the hill, but something told me not to. I talk to my dogs, and I know they hear what I say, but I don't know if they listen. He listened. I told the deer I was here to visit, that I wished for a brief stay and to hopefully enjoy nature again and grow appreciation for nature once more. As if satisfied by the answer, he backed up, only a couple steps, but he backed up and I kept on. I drove and watched him in the mirror. He returned to the herd, not taking an eye off of me. I've been on plenty of camping trips, been spooked by people and critter alike wandering around camp, even having opened the flap to a deer walking through on my many trips with scouts. But this was one of my first alone. Up there, it dropped to around 0 degrees, and when I was in the tent, all I wanted to do was huddle in my sleeping bag. So that's what I did. The sun went down quick when you're tucked between peaks. The mountains hide the sun even sooner, so it got dark and cold. If you've ever watched a four-legged animal walk, you'll know T has a pattern. Having been around dogs all my life, it's something I've mildly found interesting. Almost always after a forefoot comes down, a rear foot follows, giving a distinct sound to their footsteps. When I was woken up at around 2-3 on the morning, my first thought was a bear late to hibernate. Knowing I had no food in the tent and only had food on the car, I stayed huddled as not to startle it, or give it any reason to think I smelled like food after all. I tried to listen to it to see where it was walking. That's when I got scared. There was snow surrounding my camp. There was no mistaking every single footstep it made. Slow, one on front of the other. No matter how hard I tried to imagine, there was no rear foot following. Just the 1-2, 1-2, then the pause. That was the worst part. I slipped my hand out of my bag that I was huddled on and grabbed the hatchet I was carrying with me, trying to reassure myself I was making stuff up. I pulled my hand back in and I heard it start to walk again, keeping on its way, the direction it'd been going before stepping into my camp, and eventually I couldn't hear its slow steps anymore. It was light and two-legged. That's all I could discern. The next morning I went to look. Even with the snow, it was so packed around my sight from cars and footsteps that it was either too packed or already walked over to really discern any new tracks. I stayed in a hotel the night after this happened, abandoning my gear to pack in the sunlight. 3-4 inches of fresh dry snow had come down over the night, and when I walked into my camp, I noticed a trail of tracks. While the terrain was still uneven, I couldn't help but notice what looked like a set tracks tightly together, like you would see a deer's tracks, and suddenly as they left the grass and entered the dirty snow of camp, they seemed to be spaced out, almost like my own footsteps I left behind walking over to them were. If it were a skinwalker, it makes sense if JT were the deer I spoke to, as they tend not to be violent in the day. But being a hunter, it saw and paid attention to where its next target would be going. But when it went on the prowl, only finding a quiet tent. Or it could have been a Wendigo, content with my goals of the forest, letting me leave, but coming by in the night as a warning of what was to come, seeing as what I drove into was headed for the mountains. I was driving home from work, having finished at 8 p.m. I was about halfway home, driving down a farm road in Illinois, when I started feeling really paranoid. As I drove by a large group of deer on either side of the road, I slowed to about 30 miles per hour to avoid hitting them. Their appearance wasn't unusual, but the sheer number of them and the way they made me feel struck me as odd. Around where I live, there aren't many places for deer to inhabit, just empty fields at this time of year and small privately owned woods. Additionally, there have been reports of people driving home at night disappearing, leaving only their cars parked on farm roads, with nothing missing of monetary value except personal items like phones or wallets, often found discarded nearby. I thought, I'm putting this in as it might be relevant, since in most cases, you'd only see 7 or maybe 8 deer, never more than that. As I continued driving, I started counting the deer, reaching 47 before I stopped. I had turned down the volume on my car's radio, my paranoia building. When I slowed to make a turn, I heard what sounded like a stampede, as far more than the 47 deer I counted ran past my car, jumping over the road and disappearing into the dark field on the other side. I drove for less than 3 minutes when I heard quieter hooves. 5 deer approached my vehicle from the field, and as I slowed down, suppressing my fight or flight response, 4 of them were large bucks, almost the size of elk. The final one stood in the middle of the road in front of my car, much larger than the elk I saw in Alaska the year before, even larger than the moose near my rental cabin on the same trip. My paranoia and fear disappeared as I looked at the deer. It felt like it was trying to communicate with me, conveying its basic meaning directly to my mind. The feelings it conveyed were extreme claustrophobia, disgust at what I was in, pity for me, a desire for my escape, and finally, its love for nature and the forest that used to be there. I shut off my vehicle and began to unbuckle my seatbelt when I received an alert on my phone for daily rewards in a mobile game. This caused the deer to step back and conveyed fear to me. I lost all the peace and comfort I felt a moment before, immediately restarted my car, and began to reverse. The deer got to the side of the road, allowing me to pass. I reversed to let the creature avoid me, not out of compassion, but more out of obligation. I can't fully explain why I felt the way I did, but I sped home nonetheless. As I drove away, I got the worst headache I have ever experienced, and when I went to wipe my upper lip, I discovered blood from a nosebleed, which I hadn't realized I had. Less than an hour has passed since this happened, and I haven't had time to process it fully. I hope someone here can give me an idea. This is something I've been experiencing on a regular basis for the last 2 or 3 years, but it has been happening way less frequently recently. It would maybe happen once every 6-12 months prior to that. What tends to happen is that, as I'm trying to fall asleep, I can feel animals running over me, or I can hear them or feel the weight of them crawling around the bed. The most common are mice or hamsters, or I guess just some kind of rodent, since I can never fully see it. This is often also accompanied by a very slight shimmer or ripple in the air where I can feel or hear the animal. Sometimes I have to wake up and stay awake for 20 minutes or so, and when this happens, it looks like reality is shaking or not in place properly when I look around. So I occupy myself until my surroundings look normal. I got to the point where I was able to ignore it and go to sleep, but I've just had to wake myself up because I could feel someone or something rubbing my feet, and I heard an alarm go off followed by some kind of Japanese announcement. I'm in the UK in addition to the animals. I am currently waiting for my surroundings to seem normal before I try to go back to sleep. If anyone has any insight into this, that would be great. Thanks. P.S. I've also had many other experiences where I've taken naps, and it feels like someone is touching me not inappropriately, and I could swear someone slapped me once. This is something I've been dealing with on a regular basis since I was 19, 20, now 26, and I have no idea what to do with these experiences. I heard in the past that supernatural abilities like clairvoyance and pyrokinesis are most easily accessed when you put your brain in a trance-like state, half asleep, half awake, so I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it either. Am I slipping between reality or something? Sometimes if I concentrate hard enough when I close my eyes, there's a wall of blinking eyes staring back at me, and even when my eyes are open, it's like there's something akin to wings with eyes, also blinking regularly, etched into my eye lens or retina if I focus my eyes just right. I've also just seen the deja vu tag and thought I should also mention that I've been experiencing it consistently since I was 11. Apologies for the dump. I'm very confused. Although I don't talk about this with people in real life, the feet rubbing thing was too weird for me to not at least post and see if anyone has experienced something similar. I went to pick up a liquor shot dispenser from a guy who was giving it away free on Craigslist. I get to the guy's apartment and he asks me to wait in the living room while he grabs it out of his bedroom. It's at this time that I notice he clearly has some money. The apartment is pretty large for a New York City one-bedroom, and there's a grand piano in the main room. This is also when I noticed that there's also a number of lavender-scented candles laying lit around the place. Not that weird, maybe the dude just likes lavender. Well, that's why. He comes out holding the drink dispenser, completely naked. "Would you care for a drink?" he asks. No. His face sinks, and I very slowly step over and gently take the dispenser from his hands and walk backwards out of the apartment. I'm a guy, by the way. I was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base for a while, and in 2013, a friend and I were leaving the dorms to walk over to the dining facility. It's about a 2-minute walk, and since we worked mornings, it was around 5:30. As soon as we hit the pavement of the parking lot, we heard the laughter of a little girl. Despite not seeing anyone, we just looked at each other, attributing it to the wind or maybe a deer. Fast forward a month, I'm in my car at nighttime, and the light on my phone is reflecting off the driver's side window. I thought I saw someone standing outside the car, but upon looking, there was no one there. I chalked it up to me scrolling on Facebook. After a few more minutes of scrolling, I got out, and to my surprise, there's a little girl standing in front of the dumpster with a white dress and a whitish hat. She laughed and ran around the dumpster. Now, I was slightly scared because the laugh was the same one I had heard a month prior. But I was also concerned, thinking there were a few families that lived on base, and maybe this girl was a dependent around 8 years old. It was cold, so I looked behind the dumpster where I thought she was hiding, but no one was there. I circled the area twice, and then my other friend came out, asking what I was doing. I shared the story with her, and she helped me look in one of the abandoned buildings right next to ours. I thought there was no way this little girl could be fast enough to run into the building by the time I got behind the dumpster. However, after an extensive search, we found nothing. A ghostly encounter with the mysterious girl remains unexplained. The next story wasn't mine, but it happened to a friend of mine who was previously stationed in Guam. He mentioned being on the second floor of a 3-story building, and his neighbors upstairs would consistently run around at night. Assuming they were on opposite shifts, he decided to leave a note on their door, kindly asking them to stop. However, the noise persisted. The following night, he resorted to hitting the ceiling with a broom and knocking on their door. There was no answer, but he could hear them running inside. Frustrated, he called the landlord, who happened to be drunk at a party. The landlord, after being picked up, was briefed on the situation during the drive back. However, to their surprise, the landlord claimed not to rent out to anybody. Upon returning to the apartment, they heard the running again on the way up the stairs. Suspecting someone squatting or illegally renting the space, the landlord angrily opened the door, ready to confront the supposed trespassers. Much to their bewilderment, no one was there. They checked every room, closet, cabinet, and even the ceiling. Security forces were called, but they found nothing. Ghosts? The last story isn't mine either, but it involves someone I was deployed with in Kuwait. During a shift change, our captain briefed us, advising to challenge anyone who seemed out of place. A few days later, a fellow soldier stood up and reported seeing someone near the NCO sleeping buildings. He didn't recognize the uniform and approached the individual, but the person disappeared into the fog, eluding him. He emphasized that it wasn't anyone whose uniform he had worked with during his time there, considering we collaborated with several other countries. Strikingly, the description of the uniform closely matched what the Air Force wore during the Gulf War. Naturally, the collective conclusion was leaning towards the supernatural, perhaps encountering a ghost once again. My uncle has been hunting since he was a teenager. He's in his 50s now. He's not what some would call a manly man, but he's an outdoorsman through and through. A top-notch hunter and angler, and he's a dead-eye with any firearm. He's won shooting competitions and once shot the strings off from balloons at varying distances, then shot the balloons as they floated away. This was at a FBI-sponsored public meet and greet after an agent bet him he couldn't do it. He used a new pistol the agency was showcasing. Be it a rifle, shotgun, pistol, doesn't matter. If he wants to shoot it, it gets shot. Anyways, 5 or so years ago, he's up by the Canadian or US border with some friends. Lots of lakes up there and very thick forest. A number of the lakes are kept pristine by having a strict no-motor policy. You can't have a boat in the water with a motor attached. It's an area that requires a lot of manual work to hunt and fish. You carry everything on your back. No ATVs, no pickup trucks, just miles and miles of forest and water. This is hunting, fishing, and camping in the remotest sense. Him and his friends canoe across a lake and portage a while. Cross another lake. Portage a while longer. Looking for a good place to begin their hunt. After some hours of getting completely engulfed by nature, they come to an area that seems good for setting up camp. The nearest civilization is days away on foot. They are in the proverbial middle of nowhere, which is perfect for the kind of trip these guys had planned. They set up camp and begin their hunt. The plan was to go off in different directions and prospect the area, meet back at camp by nightfall and discuss the plan for tracking the next morning. The men all pick a direction and begin prospecting into the woods alone. At this point, my uncle is a couple of hours into his prospect. So, for those of you keeping score, my uncle has entered a remote forest, canoed and portaged for half a day further into the woods, and is now on his own after having hiked even further into the woods. He is as secluded as a person can get. At some point in his hike, my uncle feels uneasy. He's not sure why, but something is starting to make him feel on edge. He has all of his firearms holstered at this point. He continues on his hike, taking notes of the area to share with his friends back at camp. He's busy jotting notes down when he suddenly gets a massive pang of anxiety. Fear begins taking over his faculties, and he has no idea why. He starts surveying his immediate surroundings and sees something in the distance. Something oddly out of place. He is now holding his pistol. He moves toward the object slowly and unsure. As he does, he realizes there isn't a single thing making a sound in the woods but him. All of the birds have gone absolutely quiet. He gets close enough to the object to see what it is. A medium-sized Coleman cooler and what looks to be brand new. The juxtaposition of this brightly colored, man-made cooler in the absolute seclusion of its surroundings has my uncle confused to no end. But there it is. Set in the middle of nowhere with nothing or no one around for days, a perfectly new cooler. It's at this point in the story my uncle swears he had absolutely no inclination to open the cooler. In fact, everything in his being was telling him to leave it alone and get back to camp. As if the forest itself were warning him to turn around. He has now traded his pistol for his shotgun and has immediately began hiking back to camp. He says after about 5 minutes of hiking he began to feel better, and after about 7 to 10 minutes he noticed the birds chirping. He made it back to camp within 45 minutes to an hour. He sat around camp waiting for the others to return and shared with them what happened. His friends wanted to find the cooler the next day, but my uncle refused to go looking for it. The rest of their trip was pleasant and nothing out of the ordinary happened. The first time my uncle shared this story was with me and my dad a few days after he got back from his trip. He was visibly upset while talking about it and became short with me when I gave him a hard time for not looking inside the cooler. He has no speculation as to where it came from, what was in it, or why it was there. He just knew somehow it was no good.